The day Earth shook the universe. The cosmic city of Ithra, 7 pulsed with vibrant energy, a spectacle that stretched across the stars. Massive, shimmering towers rose from the surface, crafted from living metal that glowed like molten galaxies, their shapes constantly shifting with the energies of the planet. Above, a swirling nebula bathed the scene in a breathtaking aurora, casting an ethereal glow over the sprawling metropolis. Alien ships of every conceivable design hovered in the sky, their engines emitting harmonic hums that vibrated to the very fabric of space. In the center of it all, the obsidian crucible, a colossal arena formed from the heart of a dying star, loomed. Its black walls absorbed light, yet emitted an otherworldly aura, standing as a symbol of the galaxy's greatest contest, the tournament of celestial ascendancy. Creatures of unimaginable form and size filled the arena's many viewing platforms. Among them, the Elleriths, beings of pure light, hovered silently, their luminous bodies shifting between forms. The Axlorians, vast serpentine creatures that could manipulate time, coiled around their seats, their long bodies gliding effortlessly through the air. Glowing jellyfish-like beings, the Ozithians, drifted gracefully on the wind, their translucent bioluminescent tentacles trailing beneath them like streams of stardust. And there in the heart of the gathering stood the chorus, a race of imposing, armored giants whose very presence caused ripples in space-time. Each species, so vastly different, yet bound by a singular purpose, to witness the rise of the next supreme ruler of the universe. The ground trembled beneath the assembled crowd as the event began, the air thick with the weight of ancient traditions, and the anticipation of the greatest challenge in all the galaxy. Jackson Jacks, Hayes stood at the edge of the bustling preparation chamber, the hum of alien technology filling the air around him. He wasn't one to be overwhelmed by the grandeur of the moment, though. Instead, he adjusted the straps of his worn-out hoodie, casually checking his wristwatch, an old, clunky analog piece from Earth. As the galaxy's finest warriors, strategists, and mystics milled about, prepping for the tournament of celestial ascendancy, Jax had one thing on his mind. Where do they keep the snacks around here? While the other contestants stood in near-perfect harmony, deep in meditation or surrounded by their meticulously designed armor and high-tech gadgets, Jax had a different approach. He pulled a pack of gum from his pocket, popped a piece in his mouth, and leaned back against the wall, eyes half closed as though he were waiting for a bus in downtown Earth. The Axlorians, floating serenely in the air, gave him a curious glance. The chorus, towering over the room like statues, barely noticed his presence. The crystalline Zarians, known for their precision and elegance, cast a look of mild confusion his way. But Jax, he was just here to enjoy the ride. His equipment, a single, compact blaster slung over his shoulder in a sleek, custom-made suit, part space armor, part streetwear, designed for comfort more than intimidation. He wasn't here to impress anyone. In fact, he'd been told repeatedly by his superiors that a human had no place in the tournament, let alone a guy with a penchant for breaking the rules. But that's what made Jack stand out. He wasn't about to play by the others' expectations. "Hey, anyone seen the food court?" he asked, barely raising his voice as he scanned the room, casually tossing a wink to a passing Ozithian. The alien tilted its transparent, floating head in a way that might have been considered a smile if Jax had bothered to learn their body language. He was the underdog, for sure. But as Jax grinned to himself and cracked his knuckles, there was a quiet confidence in the way he didn't even care about the pressure. The universe had no idea what was in for. The moment the colossal gates of the obsidian crucible clanged shut, the arena fell into an eerie silence. A hushed anticipation spread across the gathered crowd, as the galaxy's finest warriors, mystics, and tacticians took their places on the battle platforms. It wasn't just a contest of strength, intellect, or skill. It was a fight for supremacy, for control over the universe itself. At the center of this maelstrom stood Lecter Sol, the reigning champion of the tournament of celestial ascendancy, and a name spoken in fearful reverence across the galaxy. His chiseled features were as cold as the stars he commanded, and his presence alone made the very air grow dense with power. A being of immense discipline and ancient knowledge, Lecter had trained for millennia, mastering every art of combat, strategy, and mysticism. His blackened silver ceremonial armor gleamed like the void itself, a perfect blend of precision and intimidation. As he stood in the center of the preparation area, Lecter turned his gaze toward the holographic projection of his challengers. His eyes lingered on one in particular, Jackson Hayes, the human who had somehow managed to break through every impossible obstacle to qualify. The odds of a human even making it into the tournament had been deemed unbelievably absurd. But there he was. No training, no ancestral knowledge, no divine power, just an underdog with a sarcastic smile and an unshakable sense of self. Lecter's lips curled into a thin, humorless smile. "You are an anomaly," he murmured, his voice carrying the weight of millennia. But an anomaly can only break the rules for so long. The old ways will prevail. Around him, the others could feel the shift in energy. The air seemed to tighten as Lecter took his first step toward the main arena. His reputation was legendary, and his victory seemed inevitable. He was everything the universe had come to expect from a champion, ancient, wise, and untouchable. But Jax? He was just a human with a crumpled hoodie and a misplaced sense of confidence. He'd never faced anyone like Lecter. His blaster? Useless against someone who could bend time and space. His tactics? Irrelevant when facing a being who had studied every battle, every tactic, for centuries. Yet, in the depth of the arena, a spark of something unfamiliar flickered in Jax's chest. The odds were stacked impossibly high, and everyone expected him to fail. But Jax wasn't here to prove them right. He wasn't here to play by the old rules. And that, for the first time, might just be the thing Lecter had underestimated. Jax wasn't like the others. That much was clear. While the galaxy's finest warriors meditated in serene silence, practiced energy manipulation, or fine-tuned their advanced combat gear, Jax was, well, he was sprawled out on the cold, metallic floor of the locker room, attempting to do push-ups with his arms splayed out to either side. "Come on, Jax," he muttered, groaning as he pushed himself up, his face flushed with effort. "This is how we do it on Earth. At least, this is how I do it." A few feet away, the Axlorians floated, their elongated bodies undulating in the air, watching in bemused silence. They had no need for physical exertion. Their gravity-defying forms required only the slightest concentration to remain in place. But they couldn't help but observe the human, who was dripping with sweat from just 10 push-ups. One of the Zarians, crystalline beings whose transparency allowed them to flicker with light as they moved, tilted its geometric head, blinking slowly. "Your method is unusual," it remarked in a melodic voice. Jax paused mid-push-up, gave a casual grin, and called out, "You should try it sometime. Great for the core, if you have one." He winked, clearly more interested in the banner than his actual workout. Across the room, a Korith, a hulking armored being, narrowed its glowing eyes at him, letting out a deep, almost thunderous growl. "You are not preparing." It rumbled in a voice that resonated with the low hum of distant stars. "Oh, I'm preparing," Jax replied, finally completing his set with a triumphant grunt. He flipped onto his back, hand behind his head, as he casually kicked his feet up onto a nearby bench, lounging as though he were about to watch a movie. "You see, while you guys are off doing weird, gravity-defying, soul-altering rituals, I'm just getting some blood flowing. Keep it simple, right?" He stretched his legs out in an exaggerated yawn. "By the way, do any of you guys know if there's a vending machine around here? I could go for a protein bar, or, like anything with actual taste." The other competitors looked at him, baffled by his laid-back attitude. The Axlorians pulsed with confused energy, their transparent forms flickering in what might have been disbelief. The chorus looked as though they were debating whether to disintegrate him on the spot. The Zarians, unable to fully comprehend his style, simply vibrated at a higher frequency, something akin to an alien chuckle. Jax grinned as he swung his legs off the bench, standing up and tossing a last glance at his gear. Nothing too fancy, just a bit of human tech with a few personal modifications. He rolled his shoulders, cracked his neck, and gave a thumbs up to a nearby, hovering Ozithian, who regarded him with curiosity. All right, I'm ready for this," Jax said, almost too casually. "You guys are all about energy fields and ancient combat philosophies. I'm about getting stuff done. Keep it fresh, keep it fun." He slapped his own face lightly to wake himself up, the slap echoing a bit louder than expected in the metallic chamber. The energy-based beings and mystics still stared at him, their minds trying to make sense of this strange human. Yet there was no doubt that Jax's unpredictable nature had them second-guessing themselves. They had all come to see how they'd win. But Jax? He was here to show them that maybe the rules they built themselves around didn't matter as much as they thought. The first match was a spectacle in itself. Jax stood across the arena from his opponent, a towering, 8-armed creature covered in iridescent scales, its multiple eyes blinking in perfect synchronization. The creature's name was Zixer, and was an expert in fluid, multidimensional combat, able to split its essence into several forms, each one attacking from different angles. It was a fighter of precision, a being whose strikes came from all sides at once, moving with such speed that it could overwhelm even the most seasoned warriors. The crowd held its breath as Zixer's arms began to shimmer, each limb elongating into a translucent blade of pure energy. It let out a warbling hiss that echoed through the arena, and the arena lights flickered. In response, Jax just yawned. He stretched dramatically, glanced around, and then raised his hand nonchalantly. "Hey, you guys mind if I turn on a little background music?" he called, pulling a tiny speaker from his belt and flipping it on. The sharp sound of Eye of the Tiger blasted out into the arena, the energetic beat cutting through the tense atmosphere. Zixer blinked, its multiple eyes narrowing in confusion. Jax gave a casual salute and hopped into a ready stance. "All right, let's do this." Zixer lunged, its many arms slashing with blinding speed. Jax didn't even flinch. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a laser pointer, pointing it directly at one of Zixer's eyes. The creature recoiled, blinking in confusion, its blades freezing mid-swing. "Ah, come on, don't be a baby," Jax said with a grin, shifting his weight to avoid the remaining strikes. He tapped his foot to the beat, casually dodging as the laser danced around Zixer's shifting eyes. Zixer's form flickered in the air, its body splitting into multiple versions of itself, each one moving at different speeds, each one striking at a different angle. Jax, however, seemed to be enjoying the challenge. His unpredictable style, dancing around, avoiding the strikes with ease, confounded the creature. Every time one of its arms came close, Jax would flick his wrist, sending the laser pointer's beam into another eye, disorienting it further. "Is this a fight or a game of hide-and-seek?" Jax called out with a chuckle as he ducked under another swipe, the laser pointer dancing just out of reach. Finally, with a well-timed leap, Jax grabbed hold of a nearby railing and swung himself over Zixer's head, landing gracefully behind the creature. As Zixer turned in confusion, Jax placed his hands on its back and, with a grin, hit the reset button on his speaker, swapping the music to an 80s pop track, much to the crowd's amusement. The distraction worked. Zixer froze just long enough for Jax to swipe the creature's energy blade from its hand and knock it to the ground, the crowd roaring in shock. "Well, that was fun," Jax said, dusting off his hands and giving a mock bow. "Nice try, buddy. But, let's stick to the basics next time." The second match was no less bizarre, though Jax's opponent was much more intimidating. A massive, floating being known as Ithri, composed entirely of swirling plasma and dark energy, hovered in front of him. It could manipulate the very fabric of reality, warping space and time with each wave of its hand. Jax was impressed, until he saw the flicker of energy that signaled the start of the fight. Ithri immediately extended a tendril of plasma, aiming to engulf Jax in a field of pure energy. Most fighters would have been vaporized instantly, but Jax, who had somehow managed to keep his cool through all this, just grinned, pulled out his blaster, and fired a quick shot toward the ceiling. The energy field collapsed with a flash of light, but Jax wasn't done. He then jumped straight into a cartwheel, spinning his body out of the way, while Ithri's energy tendrils reached toward him. Instead of engaging head-on, Jax pulled out his laser pointer again, gleefully zipping it across Ithri's core. The plasma entity recoiled, its attention momentarily divided. "What is it with you and lights?" Ithri's distorted voice echoed, a shimmering ripple across its body. Jax shot at a playful grin, casually dodging another tendril of plasma. "Hey, you started it with all the flashy stuff. I'm just keeping it simple." Then, without warning, he tossed a bright, reflective object into the air, distracting Ithri with its flashing light. The creature instinctively reached toward it, but that was when Jax took his shot. His blaster discharged with precision, the blast hitting the entity's core and sending Ithri plummeting to ground in a fiery explosion of plasma. The crowd was stunned into silence, not because of the immense power Jax had shown. There was none, but the sheer absurdity of it all. A human? Using toys, distractions, and basic tricks to outsmart a creature of pure energy? It was a fight no one could have predicted. Jax, for his part, wiped his hands on his pants and looked up at the cheering crowd. See? Told ya. Simple. The victory was unexpected, to say the least, but Jax's unorthodox approach was working. Whether they liked it or not, the galaxy was about to learn that sometimes it wasn't the strongest or most skilled who won. It was the one who refused to play by the rules. Lecter Soul stood in the observation chamber, his eyes narrowing as he watched the holographic projections of Jax's matches unfold before him. The arena's grandstand still echoed with the applause from Jax's most recent victory, the chaotic blend of human unpredictability and raw physicality catching the eyes of even the most jaded competitors. Lecter's hand tightened around the armrest, his fingers leaving faint indentations in the metallic surface. The human was still standing, still winning, still defying every expectation, every law of combat that had been honed for millennia. Each match, every move Jax made, was a challenge to everything Lecter had been taught. "This is impossible," Lecter murmured to himself, his voice low and controlled, though a ripple of unease passed through his glowing, silver eyes. The holograms flickered, showing Jax outsmarting, outmaneuvering, and even outwitting his opponents with absurd ease. There was no grace to it, no mastery of technique. There was only chaos. The other competitors in the tournament had the wisdom of ages, the discipline of warriors who had honed their craft for centuries. Zixer, Ithri, the others, they embodied the pinnacle of training, practice, and tradition. And then there was Jax. How does he keep doing it? Lecter muttered, pacing slowly in front of the projection. His armor, which was normally a monument of power, now fell heavier, as though burdened by a new weight, one he could not quite place. Jax wasn't simply breaking the rules. He was mocking the very concept of rules. Lecter's fists clenched at his sides, his mind whirling as he tried to understand. He had observed every tactic, every ancient art, every strategy. He had fought against beings who could manipulate time itself, faced titanic monsters who bent reality to their will. Yet none of them had ever been as infuriatingly effective as Jax. He didn't fight by the traditional code. He didn't fight at all, not in the way Lecter understood. He played with his opponents. He distracted them. He broke their focus with bizarre techniques, like lights and strange earth music, until they didn't know where the fight began and where it ended. "He's ridiculous," Lecter muttered under his breath, frustration dripping from his words. But there was something more, something deeper in his mind that he hadn't fully acknowledged yet, a nagging thought that, no matter how much he scorned the human's methods, there was a perverse kind of genius in them. Jax wasn't just defeating his opponents. He was outwitting them, using the most primitive tactics to dismantle their centuries of expertise. Lecter sat down heavily in a nearby chair, his golden gaze fixed on the still flickering projection of Jax, who was now lazily leaning against a wall in the arena, preparing for his next challenge as if it were just another day. In the stillness, Lecter's mind began to sift through his long years of combat. For centuries, he had adhered to the ancient ways of battle, precision, discipline, the honing of one's inner power. Combat was sacred. It was a path of self-discovery, a dance that demanded respect for tradition. But Jax was something else entirely. This human didn't respect tradition. He laughed at it, mocked it. Jax didn't care about the galaxy's rules, the honor of combat, or the sacredness of the fight. He fought with unpredictability, with an audacity that had no place in a tournament built on millennia of code. But perhaps that was the true threat. "He's not following the path," Lecter whispered, his voice laced with a mixture of confusion and dawning comprehension. "He's changing it." A cold shiver ran down his spine. What Jax was doing, what he had always done, was dismantling the entire foundation of the Tournament of Celestial Ascendancy. It wasn't just the way Jax fought. It was a way he made every opponent rethink their entire existence. He was revealing something deeper. Combat wasn't just about strength or discipline. It was about mind games. Lecter's lips twisted in something resembling a smile, though it was far from pleasant. If Jax was changing the game, then perhaps it was time for Lecter to remind everyone, especially himself, that there were still forces at work far beyond the human's understanding. But there was a part of Lecter that couldn't ignore the feeling rising in his chest. The feeling that Jax had done something far more dangerous than any other opponent had ever done before. Jax wasn't just a challenger. He was a revolution. And Lecter knew, deep down, that he couldn't allow this chaos to spread any further. Next match, Lecter muttered, his tone hardening, "I will end this." But even as he spoke, the nagging thought remained, a whisper at the edge of his mind. What if he can't? The final match was drawing near, an entire arena buzzed with energy that could be felt in every corner of Nexus Prime. Jax had made it to the semifinals, and now, after a string of bizarre victories that defied all logic, he was on the verge of facing Lecter Sol, the undisputed champion of the Tournament of Celestial Ascendancy. The crowd was a chorus of whispers, each voice laced with disbelief and growing tension. Spectators, from all corners of the galaxy, crowded the floating platforms that circled the arena. Alien faces, some composed of liquid, others of light, watched in wide-eyed astonishment as Jax, the human with no known combat techniques, prepared for his final confrontation. Holographic betting boards flashed overhead, updating in real time, but the numbers were staggering. Lecter Sol, 1.000. Jackson Hayes, error, does not compute. It was as if the entire concept of Jax's existence in the tournament had caused a system malfunction. He was a glitch in the matrix of intergalactic combat, a human whose style was pure chaos, a style that was simply not supposed to work. Yet here he was, standing in the arena, just as casual as he'd been in every match before. Jax stood at the edge of the field, stretching his arms above his head, yawning as though he were about to take a nap. His blaster was still slung over his shoulder, his hoodie pulled tight, his demeanor more fitting for a student at recess than for someone about to face the most powerful being in the galaxy. A few aliens around the perimeter whispered in awe, while others could barely contain their bewilderment. "He's still here," one of the cohorts muttered in disbelief, its glowing eyes narrowed. "I don't understand," said a high-ranking official from the Federation, his multi-limbed form twitching nervously. "He's made it this far, without any formal training, without any discipline." He shook his head. This is unprecedented. Far above them, the Council of Intergalactic officials watched in silence, their faces expressionless as they observed the match unfolding. A few of the more traditional factions were uneasy. The entire tournament had been built on ancient principles of combat, techniques passed down through countless generations. But Jax's method of distraction, chaos, and unpredictability had utterly upended everything they held dear. "He's going to ruin it all," an elder monk murmured, her translucent wings folding in agitation. "He's not just fighting. He's mocking the sacredness of the fight itself." The murmurs among the crowd grew louder. In every corner of the arena, disbelief turned into frustration, and frustration turned into anger. The established order was buckling under the weight of an unknown variable, Jax. They had seen warriors who could tear through the fabric of space, those who could shift the tide of time with a mere thought. And yet, here was a human who won by distracting, by outwitting, by playing. Jax stretched his neck, gave a slight grin, and glanced up at the towering figure across the arena. Lecter Sol, the champion of champions, standing tall with an imposing aura of power that made even the most seasoned combatants hesitate. Lecter's armor gleamed, and his eyes burned with ancient, calculated wisdom. But now, a flicker of uncertainty passed through him. The thought of facing Jax had grown into something more than just a challenge. It had become a personal battle, not just against a human, but against everything he had ever known. Lecter's mind churned with the knowledge of the many ways he could obliterate Jax, of the techniques he had mastered over the centuries. But there was something else gnawing at him, something deeper. The human had made it to this point by breaking the game as much as playing it. How could he fight someone who had no respect for the very rules that govern the tournament? Is this what the galaxy has come to? Lecter thought, his jaw tightening as he clenched his fists. This mockery of combat, this absurdity, I will put an end to it. Jax caught his eye, a smirk spreading across his face, and gave a half-hearted salute. Ready when you are, Shiny. The reaction from the spectators was immediate, a mix of laughter, disbelief, and gasps. How could he be so nonchalant? How could a human, someone with no grand lineage, no ancient heritage, no master of the arts, treat this like a joke? Yet, as Jack stretched his shoulders and casually cracked his neck, a nervous tension swirled in the air. There was something about his unpredictable confidence that unsettled everyone, even Lecter. On the betting boards, a new message flashed. The odds are now 10,000:1 in favor of Lecter. But it didn't matter. The digital numbers couldn't account for what was happening. Jax's sheer unpredictability had shaken the very foundations of this tournament. His methods were unconventional, unrefined, and yet he had become the most dangerous wild card the galaxy had ever seen. As the countdown began for the final round, the galaxy held its breath. This wasn't just about a fight anymore. It was about the future of the tournament of celestial ascendancy itself. Would tradition, honor, and ancient skill prove to be the true measure of power? Or would a human with no rules, no technique, and no care for tradition show the universe that sometimes the greatest strength lies in throwing everything out the window? The stakes were higher than ever. The arena fell into a hushed silence as the final match began. The entire galaxy had gathered to witness this moment, the culmination of an unprecedented tournament. At one end, Lecter's soul stood, immense, stoic, and radiant with ancient power. His armor shimmered with the light of 1,000 stars, and his very presence seemed to warp the air around him. He was the epitome of precision, the pinnacle of tradition, honed over centuries of disciplined combat. His eyes, glowing with unrelenting focus, locked onto his opponent with the cold gaze of inevitability. Across from him stood Jax, the human who defied all expectations. His stance was far from formal. He stretched his arms lazily and yawned, running a hand through his hair as if preparing for an afternoon nap. His blaster was still slung over his shoulder, and he absently fiddled with his phone, tapping on an app. "You ready for this?" Jax called across the arena, his voice casual, as if he were asking about the weather rather than facing the greatest champion the galaxy had ever known. Lecter didn't respond. Instead, he lifted his hand, his fingers forming intricate gestures that made the very air around him hum with a dark, electric energy. "You will soon learn the price of disrupting the sacred art of combat, human." The tension was palpable, and the crowd held its breath. The official called the match to begin, and as soon as the words left his mouth, Lecter was already in motion, a single, fluid motion, and he was upon Jax, his arm extended, a blade of pure energy forming in the air as if summoned by his will. He struck with the precision of a master, every movement calculated, every step a deliberate, near-perfect execution. But Jax was nowhere to be seen. Instead, the human had sidestepped the attack with ease, his hands still in his pockets. He grinned, eyes twinkling with mischief. "Gotta admit, that's impressive," he said, watching Lecter recover with a swift spin. "But you might want to try something a little less obvious next time." Lecter's eyes narrowed, and the air around him crackled with intense energy. With a snap of his fingers, the ground beneath them shifted, and tendrils of energy shot toward Jax from all directions, seeking to trap him in a sphere of electric force. It was a kind of move that had overwhelmed countless opponents in the past. Jax didn't move. He just pulled out his phone, opened an app, and started tapping furiously. "I've got an idea," he muttered, his fingers flying over the screen as the energy tendrils closed in. "Hang tight." The tendrils reached out, but before they could touch him, Jax hit the button on his phone. A loud, electronic ding echoed across the arena as a jarring tone emitted from his phone, a perfect resonant frequency. The tendrils faltered, vibrating, and then, suddenly, they imploded, disintegrating into wisps of harmless static. Lecter froze for a split second, stunned by the unexpected turn of events. What did you?" "Turns out, frequencies mess with energy fields," Jax said, looking up with a casual smile. "You might want to try harder than that." The crowd erupted into a mixture of confusion and excitement. Lecter's expression hardened into something colder than before, and with a single gesture, he called upon a storm of cosmic power. The arena itself seemed to ripple, bending the fabric of space as he unleashed an energy blast that shot across the arena like a spear of light. The ground cracked beneath the intensity of it, creating craters and fissures in its wake. Jax jumped straight up, soaring into the air with an acrobatic flip, narrowly dodging the blast. As he descended, he pulled out a laser pointer, aimed it at Lecter's face, and flicked it on. A bright danced across Lecter's glowing eyes. "Hey, try focusing," Jax said with a grin, dodging to the side as another blast barely missed him. Lecter's eyes flared with rage. He wasn't used to this. The meticulous training, the focus, the control, none of it had prepared him for this. A human, a child in comparison to him. Yet here he was, dancing through his attacks like it was a game, making a mockery of everything he'd spent centuries perfecting. With a roar, Lecter lifted both hands to the sky, his power surging as he conjured an immense, swirling storm of dark matter. The air around them bent and groaned as he called upon the forces of gravity, pulling the arena's very structure toward him. The gravitational pull became overwhelming, crushing down on Jax from all sides. But Jax didn't flinch. He simply pulled out a can of soda, cracked it open, and took a long sip. "Yeah, this feels like the kind of pressure I can work with," he muttered, not even seeming to struggle under the intense gravity. With a sudden, unorthodox motion, Jax threw the soda can directly at Lecter. The can collided with the champion's chest, bouncing off harmlessly. The absurdity of the move momentarily broke Lecter's focus. Just enough for Jax to take a deep breath and leap into the air, twisting and turning with unnatural grace. At the peak of his jump, Jax twisted his body midair and landed a light punch directly into Lecter's side. It wasn't a powerful strike. It wasn't even a well-placed one. But the sheer audacity of it, coupled with Lecter's inability to predict Jax's erratic movements, caused the champion to stagger, his control momentarily slipping. The crowd roared in disbelief. Jax had landed a hit. Lecter's armor flickered, and his eyes widened in a rare moment of vulnerability. His reaction, sharp and calculated, was now a bit slower. Jax had taken him off guard, not by strength, not by speed, but by sheer unpredictability. Jax grinned. You should have seen the look on your face. Classic. Lecter's expression darkened. This wasn't just a fight anymore. It was a question of tradition, of power, of everything he stood for. He had to win. There was no other option. Yet, as he looked across at Jax, who was now casually dancing on his feet, ready for whatever came next, Lecter realized something. Jax wasn't just fighting to win. He was fighting to change everything. The final blow was coming, but neither fighter knew how it would unfold. What was clear, however, was that this battle had already changed the universe. The final clash between Jax and Lecter had unfolded in ways no one could predict it, and as the dust settled, a profound silence filled the arena. The once vibrant energy of the crowd had been replaced with stunned awe as the official announcer's voice echoed in the empty spaces above the arena. Jax Hayes, the winner of the Tournament of Celestial Ascendancy. The words reverberated through the vast stadium, the sound of them almost unreal. Jax stood there, not in the victorious pose of a traditional champion, but with a grin, casually wiping his hands on his hoodie. He looked up at Lecter, who lay sprawled on the ground, his once pristine armor dented and scorched, his form visibly exhausted from the battle. The chaos, the unpredictability. Jax had defeated the legend not with sheer power, but with an unrelenting, playful approach that left Lecter's disciplined and methodical techniques in ruins. The absurdity of Jax's style had cracked the very foundation of the tournament's age-old traditions. He hadn't just won, he had broken the rules in ways that no one had ever imagined possible. Lecter slowly rose to his feet, his eyes flickering with both exhaustion and begrudging admiration. "You have destroyed everything I believed in," he said, his voice hoarse. "This fight was supposed to be a testament to skill, to mastery. Yet you fought with nothing but unpredictability." Jax raised an eyebrow, still holding his phone, now calmly tapping through his messages as if nothing had happened. "I didn't destroy anything. I just found a new way to play the game." There was a brief silence, the weight of the moment settling over them both. Lecter stood motionless, processing the words. His entire philosophy, everything he'd fought for over centuries, was shaken to its core by a human who had no technique, no formal training. Just chaos. But that chaos had somehow managed to outshine everything Lecter had spent lifetimes perfecting. Around the arena, the spectators were still in stunned silence, but now whispers spread like wildfire. The news would reach every corner of the galaxy. A human had won the tournament of celestial ascendancy by breaking all the rules. And in doing so, Jax had proven that there was more to power than precision, more to combat than tradition. Lecter turned his gaze to the horizon, his mind racing. His entire existence had been built on principles of control, discipline, and mastery. Yet now, those very principles have been upended by a wild human with no regard for them. But as much as it stung, Lecter couldn't deny the truth that was dawning on him. Jax's victory wasn't a fluke. It was a statement. "You've done something no one else could," Lecter finally admitted, his voice soft. "You've shown us that even in perfection, there is room for change. Evolution." Jax grinned. "Exactly. Perfection's great, but it leaves no room for growth. Rules aren't limits. They're just opportunities for something new." The crowd erupted into applause, the sound of it deafening. It wasn't just for Jax's victory. It was for the realization that things would never be the same again. The tournament, the galaxy, everything had been touched by a simple truth. What had always worked wasn't the only way. And perhaps that was the most important lesson of all. As Jax made his way to the center of the arena, his victory secure and his place in history cemented, he paused for a moment. His gaze swept over the vast stadium, over the creatures, beings, and ancient warriors who had all adhered to rules that now seemed so limiting. In that moment, Jax realized something that went beyond combat, beyond winning. The universe wasn't defined by the rules that governed it. It was shaped by the people who were brave enough to rewrite them. And as he looked out over the crowd, Jax couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride. He wasn't just the first human to win. He was the first to show the universe that sometimes the greatest strength lies in the ability to break the rules and to make something new out of the chaos. And maybe, just maybe, that was a lesson the universe needed to learn. The galaxy was on the edge of a new era, one where tradition no longer had to hold the universe captive, where rules were no longer limits, but opportunities for evolution. And Jax, the human who had shaken it all up, had just written the first chapter. As the arena lights flickered one last time, Jax took a deep breath, stretched, and muttered to himself with a smile, "Not bad for a guy who didn't even know how to hold a sword." As the dust in the final battle settled, Jax stepped out of the arena, the weight of victory heavy on his shoulders. His phone buzzed, another message from Earth. He glanced at it, then tucked it back into his pocket without a second thought. A wide grin spread across his face as he looked up at the stars, feeling the hum of the universe's shifting currents around him. Across the galaxy, as the news of his victory spread, one thing became abundantly clear. The age of tradition was over. The tournament had already begun to change, but this was just the beginning. All over the galaxy, institutions and combat schools were reeling from the shock of Jax's unconventional approach. New debates were starting. New questions were being asked. What did it mean for combat if there were no rules? What did it mean for the galaxy if one unpredictable human had thrown everything into chaos? And one, as Jax wandered through the corridors of Nexus Prime, his footsteps echoing through the ancient halls, he couldn't shake the thought that had been lingering at the back of his mind. This wasn't just about one fight. It was about shaking the foundations of everything. The next step? It was still unclear. But one thing was certain. Jax was no longer just a participant. He had become a force of nature. And whatever happened next, the universe would never look at the rules in the same way again. A hologram flickered on the wall in front of him, a voice chiming in. "Congratulations, Champion Hayes. We've been monitoring your progress. We believe you're ready for the next stage." Jax paused, turning to face the hologram with a smirk. "Next stage, huh? Well, I'm always up for a new game. What's the catch?" The hologram flickered again, and the voice, almost amused, replied, "Let's just say the universe has a lot more surprises in store for someone who isn't afraid to rewrite the rules." Jax's grin widened. He glanced up at the stars, then back at the path ahead. I'm just getting started. As the hologram flickered out, the echoes of his voice seemed to linger in the air, and somewhere in the depths of the galaxy, a new chapter was already beginning. And this time there would be no rules. Who needs rules? Jax muttered to himself with a wink. When you're the one making them,